Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Jeff Alexander, who serves as the president of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. So good to be back with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to talk. This has been obviously an extraordinary year and year and a half, really now it's going on 2 years. And so definitely want to talk about things that are happening at the CSO in terms of addressing it. Also, I just have been, lucky to be able to see and experience your work over the years. And the orchestra, which has just been so amazing and wonderful. And so I wanted to kind of, in this time we have today, tackle a little about still dealing with pandemic becoming endemic, and then also maybe some of the DEI work. But first kind of, there's definitely still some orchestras that are in the midst of kind of, I think, trying to find their post-COVID kind of transition. We're coming out of it, we're live, but we're not live. And just wondering, how are you experiencing that at the CSO? And are there any kind of specific plans that you have that relate to kind of the transition to what will be, as we all now talk about, the new normal?
Right. Well, to say the least, it's been a fascinating couple of years since the first shutdown in March of 2020. And of course, none of us expected this, none of us wanted this. But it's been interesting to see how the orchestral community has survived this, how creative we've all been, and how in many cases, including at the Chicago Symphony, it's actually brought the members of our family closer together, the musicians, the board of directors, the administration, the audiences, the sponsors, the donors, everyone pulling together to make sure that the organization remains strong and that we continue to be able to reach the community and fulfill our missions. So in those early days, in March of 2020 through about May of 2021, we were completely shut down here. And all we could do was film concerts. And we were further restricted than in some cases. We were only allowed for a long time to have a maximum of 15 or 20 musicians on stage at one time. So we did, in those, again, the early months, most of the videos that we produced were done from musicians' living rooms, which was the case of many orchestras, and those were really well done and really well received. Then as we got into the fall of 2020, we started producing chamber music concerts from the stage of Orchestra Hall at Symphony Center and created CSO TV. So that was one of the good outcomes of the pandemic. And what was so heartwarming about those videos, which we're still producing, is the number of people who've watched them and how meaningful it was. So many notes we've received, emails, letters, of how meaningful these performances were, that people were able to access them online, stay connected to the musicians of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And the musicians were very pleased to continue to have something to work towards and to connect classical music with the public, which is what we're here for. So there were some benefits to it. We all would have preferred if it didn't happen, but it made us much more sophisticated in the production of digital content, I would have to say. And some orchestras have done a lot more of that than others. But it's really, I think in that way, it's been a good step forward for our organizations. To get to your question, what are we doing now and how are we going to look forward? So we were fortunate. We were able to do some public concerts the end of May, beginning of June of 2021. Then we were able to go through the Ravinia season in the summer of 21. And thankfully, we were able to resume our concerts with a live audience here in September. So September through December of 2021, we had a good run. We're certainly not back up to the attendance levels that we were before, but the people who are coming, which is a fair number of people, are very excited to be in the hall. I think even the audience has realized how more meaningful our concerts are than they even thought they were. So the anticipation at each of the concerts is really quite extraordinary. So moving forward, we'll continue to present our live concerts. That's really why we exist. Continue to do our education programs. And of course, we'll now add some digital content to that as well.
Yeah. And so, and it's interesting, and it sounds like this was the case as well, but there are so many orchestras, institutions where, because of the digital, actually reached more people, obviously in a different way, but actually kind of reached more people. As you're looking forward now, how do you kind of view, or, you know, especially in your leadership role, do you view a percentage kind of kind of programming or audience that will be digital moving forward kind of permanently? Or is there a way that you're viewing it kind of strategically to say, here's how digital will stay? You know, we kind of got forced. Now, once we're out of being forced to do things and we're back to, you know, the live experience that's kind of our core, strategically, here's how we view digital kind of playing a permanent role in our institution.
Right. It's a little hard to predict the future. And I shouldn't neglect the fact that we have been producing radio broadcasts here on a weekly basis for over 50 years, maybe even 60 years, which of course is also digital content. And people love those radio broadcasts. Hundreds of thousands of people listen to those every week over the WFMT network. And there again, even before the pandemic, we were always hearing from people how meaningful those broadcasts were to them. People from across the country, plus people in Chicago who could no longer get out physically to get to concerts. They were still able to remain connected to the CSO. So we shouldn't forget about radio broadcasts. I think what many orchestras are finding is that now that we're back to live performances, the viewership of the digital content is actually dropping a bit. So I'm sure we'll sustain it. It's hard to know what the future will bring. The benefit, as you alluded to, is that many more people can access the music and access the orchestra from outside of the orchestra's region. In Chicago, we're fortunate that, again, pre-pandemic, we actually had ticket buyers from all 50 states every year. People would just love to come to Chicago and hear the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And of course, we toured, you know, in various places around the world every year. So a lot of people domestically and internationally got to hear the Chicago Symphony live on a regular basis. But more and more people are enjoying it from around the world. It's interesting. One of the largest numbers of viewers for our digital contact are people in Cairo. So you know, who knew that there was a large community in Cairo that wanted to hear the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and see our video. So that's fantastic. And I think our videos were viewed by people in over 90 countries. So that's really impactful and really meaningful. And of course, we'll continue to do that. I think going forward, the live concerts will always be the mainstay of what we do. And I don't know what percentage of our audience will end up viewing us digitally, but we'll have to keep both going moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. Great. So, and it definitely leaves us optimistic for the future. So I wanted to kind of pivot becoming a much more widely used word nowadays in the last year or so, but to DE&I and the work and initiatives that are taking place at the orchestra. Obviously, and certainly, you know, my sense, and having, you know, worked in this for pretty much my whole professional life, that over the past year and a half, I've really seen more evolution, interest, awareness, and actual change than potentially during the rest of my professional life. And so just kind of curious, how is that manifesting currently at the CSO, and how do you see that moving forward?
Yeah. Well, we're focusing quite a bit on DEI. We had been, of course, before the pandemic and before the tragic loss of George Floyd. But we had programs in place for 25 or 30 years already, enabling musicians of color to participate in our programs, to get lessons from our musicians. But needless to say, we've ramped that up dramatically, as have so many other orchestras. And I'm glad we have. It's going very well. Last year, we put together a wonderful group made up of members of the orchestra, members of the Chicago Symphony Chorus, members of the Civic Orchestra, our administration, and our board. These are all people who volunteered. They're over 60 people who volunteered to participate in mapping out our DEI strategy. We put together 5 different framework groups on 5 different topics, one being musicians, of course, musicians and artists, audience development, management and staff, the Nagani Music Institute, which is our education wing, and trustee retention. So those 5 groups worked for about a year, putting together their thoughts and their ideas on how we could move DEI forward. Those ideas were submitted to a panel made up basically of the senior managers of the organization. And there were way too many ideas to implement right away. So we got it down, I think, to about 35 ideas from the well over 100 that we received. And we now have a DEI action plan. And we're working away at that, everything from training for our employees on understanding the history of our country and how things have developed and how we can improve upon that, to how we program more diverse concerts. We have a wonderful new composer in residence, Jesse Montgomery, who just started in September, but has already been fantastic. And about 3 years ago, before this started, but now we're really into it, we were co-founders of a program here called the Chicago Musical Pathways Initiative, which is a program for high school students of color. We let into the program about 50 musicians per year. Again, these are high school students that have to make it clear that their intent is to become a professional musician. Of course, high school students can change their minds, but we make sure that's their intent. And this was funded by the Mellon Foundation, so we're grateful to them. And once in the program, these 50 students, there was 50 the first year, up to 100 the second year. We're now in the third year, so we have almost 150 students in the program. Once they're in the program, they get weekly lessons from members of the Chicago Symphony or Chicago Sinfonietta or Music of the Baroque or the Lyric Opera Orchestra or other freelance musicians in town. They're assigned a mentor. They get classes in how to take and win auditions, which of course is key. They're required to attend Chicago Symphony concerts as our guests, of course, but it's a very well-rounded education. They're put in chamber music groups. And in the first year of the program, there were 7 high school seniors in the program. All 7 got into the conservatory. The second year, there were 14 seniors in the program. They all got into a conservatory. This year, we have 21 seniors in the program. We'll see how they do, but we're expecting them all to get in. So I think for the future of changing the makeup of professional symphony orchestras in this country, it's programs like this. And I know a program like this exists in other cities, in Boston, I know, and in Philadelphia. As these wonderful students get into conservatories and get through their 4 or 6 or 8 years of conservatory and emerge from that, the fundamentals that they got through the program here and then through their conservatory training, I think hopefully finally we'll see a shift in the audition process and the makeup of our orchestras in the United States.
Right. And, one of the things that I really is kind of the cross section. First, love that, over 100 ideas came in, but then ultimately, like, let's work with, several dozen and look at these. In other words, that it's not just kind of one thing. And I know even going back a few years, a lot of times industries or in our field, people are like, oh, okay, we'll just do this one thing and that will kind of solve everything. But rather this sense of we need to tackle and have a series of initiatives that connect and key other organizations that we're collaborating with to really bring about systemic change. And so that's definitely, again, I think a really key source of optimism for moving forward. And especially working with wonderful people like Jesse and others, wonderful, great alums of Sphinx, which is so great to see and to be able to see those types of collaborations as well. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of, especially, extraordinary leaders, you've got to, again, there's just that breadth within DE&I, and then you have all of the other aspects of leading the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And just wondering, on the tough days, on the days when things don't seem to be going right, or there's insurmountable issues that arise, where do you as a leader draw upon for inspiration, for strength, when you feel that there's really some difficult challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, I'd say I have two answers to that. The first is that every morning I take a quick look at the news on my phone, the news app, and it doesn't take very long, 15, 20 seconds, to come upon a story that makes you realize how fortunate you are, and especially how fortunate we are to be working in this business. There's so many sad stories out in the world, so many people struggling, that no matter how difficult the day might be at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, it pales in comparison to struggles that many, many other people around the world are dealing with. So I think that's one way to remain optimistic and grateful for the work that we're able to do. And the other is to anticipate hearing the Chicago Symphony Orchestra perform every week. My favorite part of the week are those concerts that, most of the weeks, every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, sometimes Sundays. But what a pleasure and joy it is to be able to hear this great orchestra. And I've felt that way everywhere I've worked. I'm sure most orchestra managers do. That's the reason we're here. That's the reason we're doing this work, along with the education and community engagement work that we all do. So knowing what's coming and how we're touching society is really how we can and should remain optimistic.
Oh, well, Jeff Alexander, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Great pleasure. Thank you.